And now for the last of the phrases based on the four major categories: noun, adjective, preposition. What's left? Well, verbs. Verb phrases are complex and we're going to deal with them in two parts. We're first going to deal with the modifiers which are on the left of the head verb, and then we're going to deal with what is on the right hand side later. Let's call the heads of verbs lexical verbs, because we'll find that there are other sorts of verbs as well. So the heads of verb phrases we'll call lexical verbs. For example, gave Jill a book as a verb phrase. It's basically about giving something, and so give is the head. Has given Jill a book is also a verb phrase with give as the head, and we'll notice that it's changed its form. This allows us briefly to revise this notion we had earlier between a lexeme, the lexeme give, and grammatical word forms. Gave and given are both grammatical word forms, but the lexeme is the lexeme give. Will be giving Jill a book has the same lexeme as its head. So we'll call this a lexical verb, and in each case, regardless of the different forms it has, the different morphological forms, we'll say that that's the head of the whole verb phrase. Well, let's start by looking at the left. Optionally, on the extreme left periphery of the verb phrase, we can get constituents which are called modal auxiliary verbs. Modal auxiliary verbs, and you can learn these off. It's very easy to chant them to yourself. It helps you to get to bed tonight. It's better than counting sheep. Can, could, shall, should, will, would, may, might, and must. Is it worth learning these? Well, it's about as useful as learning pi to 10 decimal places. Pi to 10 decimal places is 3.141592655. What's the point of knowing that? Not a lot, but it's nice to know that you know it. So, here are the modals, and this is pretty much it for English. The modals are very interesting. In some ways, because they're a closed set, they have the kind of vague meanings that we saw with demonstratives. It's quite hard to figure out exactly what the verb can means. I can whatever it is. Have the ability? Yes. Have the permission to? I can come tomorrow morning, my mother says. Well, if she gives you the permission, then presumably you have the ability. I could come tomorrow means I am not unable to come, but there are some kinds of problems perhaps. Each of these, if you think about them, have the kind of vague meanings that a lot of the closed class sets of words have. And like all of them, we have no trouble sorting out which one to use. It's very much like the quantifiers, few and many and so on. The modals have the same kind of property. They're both vague in their meaning and ubiquitous. We use them all the time. Then there are two auxiliaries called aspect auxiliaries. There's the perfective, which is has come, has eaten, has looked. What does that indicate? Well, it indicates that the action of the lexical verb is now seen as having been completed in some way. He has cooked breakfast. If he has cooked breakfast, the cooking has finished. But this is not quite the same as present and past tense. He has cooked breakfast. He had cooked breakfast means that the cooking was completed relative to some earlier point in time. The progressive is signaled by the auxiliary verb be, and this time, instead of the action being completed, it's seen as ongoing. He is cooking. He was cooking. That is, relative to some reference point in time, the cooking was ongoing. Now you'd think that these two would be mutually exclusive. either it's ongoing or it's completed. Well, no, you can actually have both of them. He has been cooking. At some point in the past, the cooking was completed and the action is seen as ongoing before that. He has been cooking. There was some ongoing action, the be cooking bit, which is now completed. We can do both of those. On top of that, there is another auxiliary with which we'll have more to do later, the passive auxiliary. The passive auxiliary basically says that the person doing whatever it is no longer in front of the verb. So, John was cooking breakfast. The breakfast was being cooked by John. John was running. John was... You can't turn that the other way around. Passives are quite tricky, and we'll have to look at those a little later. Can we get all three of them? The meal has been being cooked. Yes, we can. The missionary has been being cooked. Yes, that's possible. Occasionally, when none of the other 3 or 4 auxiliaries turn up, we get an auxiliary like do. John does cook. But that's mutually exclusive with the others. So it only turns up when none of the others turn up. So we have rather a complicated set of things on the left, rather like we had with the noun phrase. You'll remember we had all sorts of little closed set items that could come ahead of the noun in a noun phrase. On top of that, we can also have adverb phrases. He has slowly been being cooked. He has very slowly been being cooked. Yes, adverb phrases can also precede the head verb. And here, of course, they really are adverb phrases because they're telling us more. They're modifying the action indicated by the lexical verb. Well, how do we represent this? We're going to do it in the simplest way possible. We're going to say that the lexical verb is the head, and it's on the extreme right at this point, and the others are just auxiliary verbs. Could, have, been, cut. We're not going to detail them any further for the purposes of tree diagrams. This will do for the purpose in an advanced course. If you ever want to do one of those, then you'll learn that even this is not a terribly good way of doing things, and there are better ways of doing it. Humans are fallible, and they constantly find better ways to do things. That's true even of grammarians. What about after the head? Well, as I said, we're not going to deal with that because we need a lot more background. We're going to deal with it after we look at functions in something new, something called the clause. Clauses come next.